This video is not monetized, but I do hope many people will view it, and I'm not looking for subscribers. There's no music, and for sure it is not entertaining. But if it prevents one person from being injured, it is worth it to me. I have been thinking a lot for the last couple of weeks. I had an attorney representing a client give me a call and ask some questions. I was given some details of a particular incident and then basically asked if the drum product fixed some inherent flaws in the unisender. I sell the unisender with a drum kit installed, or the drum kit separately. Climbing devices used for tree access are high risk, but they are safe. They are not dangerous. Again, they are safe, but it requires proper understanding and usage. Said another way, it is important that a user understands how a device works in order to use it properly. While every use or misuse cannot be conceived in a manual or instruction training, understanding how something works could prevent improper use and an injury or worse. Briefly and generally, how do the climbing devices that we use to access trees work? Our climbing devices allow us to ascend, descend, and also go laterally with minimal configuration change, and because of this, they often are referred to as multicenders. There are three major components that are important for this to happen. There are many variations, but to function for our needs, they must be present. First, there must be proportional and non-controllable friction. Second, there must be controllable friction. And third, there must be some method to engage these components automatically. It is extremely important that a climber's actions don't inhibit these components from doing their job.
About a month ago, we were driving back from Pennsylvania, and I got a call while we were driving along, and it was an attorney. And she said, I wanted to ask you some questions. There's been a serious incident. A climber fell out of the tree 35 feet or 40 feet or whatever she said. And she says, you make a piece of equipment that climbers use on their ascenders and stuff like that. Of course, right away I was like, here we go. But anyway, we got in a discussion, and I'd rather not focus on what that piece of equipment was, because I think that's rather irrelevant. But I'm going to try to tie in things that teach us what might have prevented this particular incident. And I think a lot of it has to do with understanding how our climbing equipment works, fundamentally and mechanically. Tree climbing equipment is a little different than rock climbing equipment, and it's different than industrial access, and it's different for a very particular reason. I love the word multicenders, because a multicender implies that it goes up the rope, it comes down the rope, and it goes laterally with very little configuration change. Now you might make some configurations, we'll talk about one piece of equipment that makes some configuration changes, but they're quite simple configuration changes to make. And they alter how the device works. But that's different than industrial access, or it's different than rock climbing. Ours is all about the anchors that we set in the tree. A rock climber has set anchors on his rock face that somebody else has drilled into the rock and everything. Industrial access, they've got all kinds of structural anchors that have been tested, and they know what that is rated for. And we take all of our rated gear and we toss it up over a branch. First of all, let me try something. Who wants to volunteer?
I'll be your guinea pig.
All right. So you're gonna have to put down your apple. And if you you can be disqualified if you. What you're going to do to throw in how to think about stuff and what you're going to do and stuff like that, it's considerably longer than that. But the reaction time in relation to gravity, if you can catch this, then you can keep it.
Good luck.
But if you snag this before I let go, then you owe me $5.
Oh, this is bad. I guarantee you I'm going to let it drop.
All right. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. We'll give you another try.
It's quick, isn't it?
Keep your hands closer together. Start with you. Anybody else want to try? Jordan,
It's hard.
you got fast
It's not
reaction.
as easy as you think.
At least you haven't disqualified. That's pretty good. All right. Anybody else?
Sure.
All right.
No, go ahead.
Are you ready?
Yes.
I think you've done the math on this.
His odds are good.
He would have done $1 if anybody ever done it.
All right. So the point is, we all have reaction time. It takes a quarter of a second. And gravity is opposed to that, right? Anybody know how far you will fall in? I'm talking free fall. How far you will fall in 1 second?
32 feet.
32 feet.
A
No,
lot of people-
it was half of that,
A lot
right?
of people would say that.
Yeah.
Anybody else? In 1 second. If I'm standing there, or as today, if some guy's up there with a box cutter and he cuts your rope, how far will you fall in 1 second?
Well, you go from 0 to 32 in 1 second.
Yeah, that's the speed. You'll fall 16 feet.
Okay, half of the 32. Okay.
Well, I don't know if it has to do with half, and that won't, because you're talking about 9.8 whatever meters per second, or 32 feet per second squared, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
See what I told you?
In 2 seconds, you will fall about 45 feet. Now, let me back up too. In that 1 second, when you hit that 1 second mark and 16 feet, you'll be going about 22 miles an hour. All right? So imagine running as fast. Well, we looked it up yesterday, how fast the fastest runner is, and that's up there. I mean, they're sprinting. Imagine sprinting into a wall.
22 miles.
Yeah, 22 miles an hour. That's just 1 second coming out of the tree. That's just 16 feet. You know? Now, hopefully you'd land on your feet. Some people can jump 16 feet. Paratroopers, and they have a way of dissipating that energy. 2 seconds. In 2 seconds, you'll fall about 45 feet. And anybody know what the speed would be? Those that answered 32 feet per second would know this answer.
64 feet per second.
Huh?
64 feet per second.
Well, no, we're talking about 22 miles an hour
At 16 feet.
Oh.
at 16
Oh.
feet. At 45 feet,
Yeah.
add 22 to more or less to
44.
that,
Yep.
you'd be going about 45 miles an hour,
Yep.
right? So let's add another second to that. Now you're going 3 seconds, you've been falling out of the tree or whatever you were standing on,
Now you're doing
and
70.
now you've actually covered a distance of about 145 feet. Again, you're accelerating, and again, you would have accelerated. Gravity is an acceleration, right? That's all it is. It's a measured acceleration that we have on the Earth's surface. It doesn't matter how much you weigh, assuming there's no air resistance and stuff. A feather and a steel ball, same speed and vacuum, all that kind of stuff. So if you do it for 3 seconds, you will have fallen 145 feet, and you'll be doing about 66 miles an hour, more or less, rounding up. So that's like taking your car has a crush zone, so that's even better, but imagine 66 miles an hour just flating into something. And another thing, if you fall out of 16 feet and you land flat on a surface that gives a little bit, I just did a little math on this the other day, and assuming you land on something that's fairly soft and it'll allow you to compress that about 3.5 inches, you'll still be hitting about 50 times your weight and gravity on that ground. I mean, that's a lot of impact. So we depend on some kind of shock absorption and stuff. So the point is, gravity is pretty unforgiving. It's very fast, and we all think about things that we should or could do to try to help ourselves. And I'll point out one incident that I had. This is years ago. I had a wild thought of trying to learn how to be a footlocker and stuff, right? So I'm footlocking, and I have my multi-sender right here and everything. And prior to this, I don't know what made me want to do this, but I had practiced as best I could the concept of not having my multi-sender. I mean, going back to the Blake sitch, everybody learns you got to protect the top of that, right? So you don't have something pushing you down to the ground. And the panic mode is to grab the rope and have something pushed down on the top of it. So I had kind of practiced that a little bit and had it in my mind, and I wish I would have been able to set something like this up and really give it some practice. But anyway, so I'm doing my foot locking and everything. I got my multi-sender and have a good foot lock. I'm ready to take my next step. That foot lock just disappeared, right? So the next thing I know, in that split second, you know, probably I did go down about 10 or 15 feet. You know, next thing I know is my gloves are heating up, and the tree is going by pretty quick. And in that moment, it took me just to, you know, get my hands off. I went down 10 or 15 feet. So it happens really fast. And had I not practiced that, I don't know if I would have kept holding onto that rope and gone to the ground. I don't know how hard I would have hit the ground or anything else, but I would have just been chasing my multi-sender all the way to the ground. So that's kind of where we are and what I want to practice. But before we do that, I want to, Will, you've got a rope runner set up over there. And I've got some other stuff here that I want to review and stuff. And let's go over to Will's rope runner first. And I want to talk about how our multi-senders work. Because the multi-senders that we use work a little different than the other devices. Even like, anybody use a Pestle rig, ID, D4 and that kind of stuff?
I use the ID.
I mean, they're pretty good if you use a 3-to-1 and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But they're really hard to rope walk on, right? Because it goes through that doesn't work and stuff like that. And what I'll talk about even applies to that. That there is an adjustment in there, but we're gonna talk about that. I think having a really good understanding of how the systems we use work makes it really important to know how to protect yourself. And I've done videos where I've talked about this a lot in the past, but there's three basic things that most, well, I'll probably say all multi-senders that we use for tree access need to have. And does anybody remember me talking about these before, what they are? Wiley?
Controllable friction point, non-controllable friction points. Can't remember the third.
Right. There are the three things. One is the proportional non-controllable friction. That means that this device will apply a percentage of my weight onto this rope, given certain circumstances are there. If I weigh 200 pounds, let's say if it's doing 70% of my weight, right? Then that would put 140 pounds here and it would put 70 pounds someplace else, right? So it's proportional. It has to get to that proportional part. And every device that we use has a method of controlling that. The rope runner, in this case, it uses, and the bottom, there's an inclined plane. So this inclined plane, the more this pulls down, because of that incline, the more it squeezes the rope, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if there's nothing up here on the top to provide that opposite, kind of like a finger trap deal, if that's not there, then that's not going to provide any friction, right? Because what's 30% or 70% of nothing? it's nothing, and that's when you're going down the rope really fast. So it does that on the bottom. Up here it uses a lever, right? So there's a pivot point right there. And the more you weigh, the more that pivot point goes into that rope and adds to that friction. So that is the proportional non-controllable friction. I can't sit there, or I shouldn't try to manipulate this going down the rope, right? That wouldn't work very well. And it defeats the purpose here. But these all have to be there in order to get that. Now, if you do something to this device that disables the proportional non-controllable friction, then you've also disabled the controllable friction. This is the controllable friction, right? We want this to be able to go from 100% friction to very little friction. I mean, 0% friction will take you straight to the ground. But we want that to be as light as possible on the top. This is like having power brakes and stuff. But we want that to be as light as possible, and we want this to control as much of the other friction. We want it to take all of this as much as we can automatically, so that we can control this friction. If those proportions aren't good, then it gets really hard to control this friction. That's why, you know, somebody first climbing, they start with a Blake's hitch. And where is the proportional non-controllable friction on a Blake's hitch? Huh? No, because you're a friction knot, you're actually controlling, right? Yeah, it's on the branch above you. It's up there, and depending on how much friction I have in that knot, it'll put that much friction in the branch. So if you put a pulley on there, then you've kind of defeated some of that friction. If you put it directly over the branch, you might be damaging the tree, but you'll have a proportional amount of the friction. But if you don't have any friction on that knot, in other words, your knot comes loose, how much proportional friction do you get? It goes to 0, and down you come, right? So this proportional friction has to work side by side with the controllable friction, and pretty much every device you see has that. For a multi-sender to be a good multi-sender, that's what makes things work. Let me walk over. I think we'll go on that Magnolia, and oh, you know what I forgot to mention too? On the rope runner, the third thing, well, I only covered the 2 things. The third thing is a spring. And what's the spring for? Every good device will have some way. This is just a regular rope grab. It's a midline attachable pestle rope grab. Great for going up rope, right? So it has proportional friction, right? But it doesn't go from 0 to 100% very well. It pretty much goes from 0 to 100% and nothing in between, right? Now, you could probably squeeze this together and try to get some controllable friction out of it, but it's really missing that controllable friction. So great device for going up the rope, no setback. It just, you know, it's a great device. But coming down the rope just doesn't work very well. You could probably squeeze it together and maybe get something out of it. So the figure 8. Oh, and on this device, it has a spring in here too. So it has a spring. So it has the proportional friction, and it has the spring. It's just missing the controllable friction. So it doesn't really work for our purposes going up and down and laterally, right? So the figure 8, great device for coming down the rope, but can you walk up the rope with this? Where is the proportional non-controllable friction in this? In the way that it wraps around the figure 8,
Yeah.
right? And the more I weigh, the more friction it'll put on there. Where's the controllable friction?
Your hand holding the rope.
In my hand, in that brake hand. If I let go of this brake hand, what happens to the proportional friction?
Going for a ride.
You're going for a ride. So when Morgan came up with the unicender, what he did is basically combine those two devices so that it would work for us as a multi-sender with very little configuration change. But it has, just like that rope grab, it has proportional friction this way, right? It goes from pretty much zero. I mean, it really tends up the rope really well that way. So it goes from 0, and then it goes to 100%. But when you put all of your weight on it, it's really hard because, again, just like that rope clamp, you're trying to make controllable friction out of proportional friction, and it just doesn't give a good result. So, and it's strongly advised not to use, they call it advanced mode. I'd prefer to call it a squeeze mode if you want, because you're squeezing these things together. And it depends on the weight of a climber, just like we were talking about the Blake's hitch, right? If you had a climber that only weighs about 80 or 70 pounds, a little kid, they can go up and down the rope on a Blake's hitch. They can go up and down on a friction hitch because there just isn't that much weight. But for the rest of us, you can't put that much weight on a friction hitch. It'll either burn it out or it'll lock it up. You know, all the time you see in comp, somebody will try to get the rescue dummy down on whatever. So this has, in this configuration, really good proportional friction that goes to 100%, works really well. But for multi-sender, it wouldn't. So what you do is, when you do it in what I like to call is the wrap mode, right? Now we've pretty much disengaged the proportional friction here. We've taken that away from the device, because when those are squeezed together like that, assuming they're all lined up, it'll go freely up and down the rope when they're squeezed together. So as soon as we squeeze that together, we've taken this rope clamp and thrown that away, and all of a sudden we've turned it into a figure 8, right? So now when we wrap the rope up over the top, we've disabled that proportional friction. But where is the proportional friction? Well, this is the controllable friction.
Well, it's the friction where you wrap
The
around.
proportional friction is in the wraps, just like it was in the figure 8.
You're non-controllable.
Right. That is, those wraps coming around over the top is the proportional non-controllable friction. Now this is the controllable friction. Being controllable friction, is it just as important to hold on to this to control your descent as it was on a figure 8?
Mm-hmm.
Almost.
Almost, but if you let go, it's going to lock.
You hope.
Yeah.
And it should.
Yeah.
It should lock, just like when you take it off,
Right.
it'll open up.
Right.
What would prevent,
rope
and
underneath.
the reason it does that, is because of the spring. Does everybody know where the spring is on a unisender? It's down in this little plunger right here. There's a spring in here, and it needs to make sure that it works. And that spring keeps this thing configured. It comes back up.
Cool.
That spring is just like the spring on the rope runner. It's just actually like the spring. Where's the spring on, I use my hitchhiker, well, on a friction hitch, on anything like that. Where's the spring in a friction hitch? It doesn't have any metal there, right?
In the hitch.
In the hitch itself, a properly tied hitch has some tension built in that will engage when you start going down the rope. And contributing to that is the friction when you're going down the rope. But that spring right there keeps everything facing up. So if you disable that spring action, from squeezing those plates together, so if you're squeezing this together and you've disabled that spring, it's not going to be able to engage, right? What are some other ways that you can disengage this spring on a unisender? What about, because it needs to be in, and this is the position it'll be in when you're sitting on it, right? just like any system, when you put flop or a little bit of slop in your so when you're on this unisender, it's going to do this. The spring is initially it's going to push this whole thing up, and everything will get engaged. As you know, when you're tending the unisender, you tend it here and you walk up the rope, right? If I have a very lightweight bridge, or I've done something to my bridge and I'm actually pulling it up this way a little bit too, what have I done? I've disengaged that spring. And so somebody that's operating this needs to understand that if you're squeezing that together, or if you're not paying attention to how this device works, then you can disengage that spring. The other way to disengage the spring is to have your hand on the top of the unisender.
All right.
If you're doing this, you're going down the rope. Or what if your saw gets caught on here? What if
Or it catches on a branch.
or catches on a branch or a piece of dead wood or something like that? And this applies to
Cat
any
in a bag.
huh?
A cat in a bag.
Cat in the bag. Yeah, you put a cat in the bag on there, and you guys are going to be having a ride. Somebody's going to be getting scratched on the way down, and that cat's going to use you for a little bit of cushion, right? So the unisender is kind of a unique device in the fact that it's combined the figure 8 with a rope clamp and just very slight modifications to how it gets used to make that configuration change. But yeah, if you have a piece of deadwood that comes down or something like that, if you don't protect the top of this, just like on a Blake's hitch, just like on a friction hitch for a hitch climber pulley, any of our multi-senders, you have to protect that. And it's really important to do that, and to make sure you're not doing something else that disables that spring. If you're climbing on a rope runner, you need to make sure that that spring is functioning properly. Same thing with a unisender. If that thing gets gummed up, I mean, I haven't seen one get gummed up, but it's possible sap gets in there and gums up that spring. Then without that spring, you're depending on the friction coming down on the rope, and if you're on a real small diameter rope, that could be problematic too. Normally you'll have enough friction on that rope, but anyway, so climbing up like this, and if you have this hooked to your harness, I guarantee you I can walk up the rope in this configuration, and if I'm not paying attention and this is somehow caught on my chest harness or whatever's happening up here, and if my foot ascender comes off, or if I'm crazy enough to be foot locking, something like that, then I start down the rope. If this thing is in that configuration because I have failed to maintain it in the proper configuration, then it and myself will be going down the rope. And unless you have the presence of mind to figure out what's going on and to make sure you keep things in the proper configuration, you can get yourself into trouble. Set up with the auto belay. I've got a harness. We're going to give you an opportunity to go up the rope, and it's going to be that instantaneous when something gives way. Has anybody been standing on a branch and had it break?
Yes.
I mean, all of us, if you've been in a tree very long, and sometimes I'll be just a little piece of dead stub because I need to get just that little more height, right? So I'll go, that's dead, but it's right now. Oh, you know, and then, you know, and you're doing this or whatever you got going on with your multi-sender or something like that, or maybe on your lanyard. You know, I did it once on my lanyard the other day, and that thing disappeared. You know how fast that happens.
Yeah.
And next thing I know, I got this other branch hitting me in the armpit and stuff. That hurt like hell. and you know, and I sat down on my lanyard. But it startles you.
Yeah.
And so what I want to do is, with that auto belay, give people a chance to know what it's like to have your hand, whatever you've got, your harness. I think it's better to actually stand on something and have your rope up here and experience that for a second. The auto belay is not going to let you go down any faster than 6 feet per second, something like that, about 4 miles an hour. So, but if you can catch it and correct it before that auto belay works, that'll be great. Now, we're not shock loading our system either because we're catching it early. That auto belay won't let you descend fast enough that you're going to shock load your system or your multi-sender. But it gives you a chance to feel that instant right there and let go. And that's what I really want people to try to build a presence of mind when that thing pops, let go. And if you haven't actually experienced that a bunch of times, I think in my case, I thought about it enough, and unfortunately, I went down far enough, but had I practiced it more, I might have had presence of mind to do that. In the airlines, of course, we practice all of our emergencies, a simulator, and this is going to be kind of like a simulator. But if you just sit there and think about stuff, it's not going to work for you. You have to have the muscle memory. The muscle memory has to already been in play. It has to go, okay, I know what to do now. We did this a couple times. We know right away that we're going to just let go and look at our multi-sender and get things figured out. So what I'm proposing is that for example, we all rope walk with our hands above our multi-sender. I mean, you just can't rope walk without your hands above this device. Now, that's pretty safe because when you're rope walking, you've got a knee ascender and you've got a foot ascender, and both of those would have to disappear before you'd come all the way to the ground. But you could hang upside down, like we talked about earlier, which would be uncomfortable if for some reason you're rope walking or if you're foot locking. So it's that. What I'm proposing is that you're up there pretending like you're either rope walking or you're up there pretending like you're sitting down on a branch or whatever, and you're getting ready to do stuff. This is where we have our hands all the time. It's hard not to climb a tree without having your hands above your multi-sender. So when that happens, you can be rope walking, you can be rope walking, you can be limb walking, something, your hands are going to be above this. And when whatever is keeping you from going to the ground, whether it's a limb or whether it's your foot ascender or whatever it is that's keeping you from going to the ground at that moment, when it just disappears, and as we know, gravity, it disappears right now, and that acceleration is fast. You can't catch a $5 bill. So when at that moment, this is going to happen, and all of a sudden that panic hits you, and your instinct is to crap. What are you going to do? You're going to grab something else. You're going to grab on the rope, probably. I doubt you're going to grab on part of the tree. You're going to grab here. And most of us, once that momentum gets started a little bit, right, we can hang from the rope. But once that momentum gets started a little bit, you're not going to stop it. Your gloves are just going to get hot. And if you don't have gloves, you're going to blisters.
Yep.
Everything's going to happen when you go down that rope. So that's what I'm proposing, is that you can pretend whatever you want to pretend, but I want people to have an opportunity to practice. Anybody do that free fall at the fair? You know, when you're going up that thing and everybody's sitting there and all of a sudden you hear that little pop, and next thing you know, you're all just dropping. It's instantaneous, and everybody screams, and it's all just, everybody goes into panic mode. Same thing can happen when you're flying an airplane. An engine blows up, and if you haven't trained for what comes next, that panic takes over and you won't do the right thing. If you train a little bit of that panic, if you feel that pop, if you feel that thing let go, and you've trained your muscles just a couple times to do this, you'll know to let go of that thing and let it do its thing. If, for the unisender, if you were going up and it was in this position, right, and you had your hands and everything, as soon as whatever's holding you up, that's going to come down and everything's going to engage, but it's going to scare the crap out of you. And if you haven't trained muscle memory and you have something up here, you might just keep going down. Of course, you know, you got to have things set up right the first time, but I think experiencing that pop and making that where it's not such panic, because you know, anybody that's had a limb break experiences that for a moment. Chances are that you know, for just that startling moment, and that's what I want everybody to try to experience here with that auto belay, is that startling moment. The only way you can do this is on an auto belay or something like that. I wouldn't do it any other way because it wouldn't be safe to actually go
Back up safety.
yeah, sometime. But yeah, you give me a chance. I'll be up there. This is the only time you'll ever see me climb a tree with a knife in my pocket. I don't use knives. I have pruning saw and stuff like that, but I don't use that. This is the only time, and I'm going to be above you a little bit, and you won't know when it's going to happen. And we will get you set up in whatever, if you want to do a stand on the foot thing I've got, you can stand like you're standing on knee ascenders and stuff. Or you can pretend it's a branch, or you can just be sitting in your harness, and then all of a sudden something lets go and experience that. Get your hand off the controllable friction so that the device can do what it is designed to do. The only way it can do that is if you get out of the way sometimes.
Okay, one question is that I climb on my hitchhiker all the time.
Yep.
And I kind of like to, I'm coming down, and I like to pop it down.
What do you mean pop it? To break it loose?
Break it loose, really, I mean, and I just let go.
Well,
That's basically what you're going to be teaching us to do.
well, except that when you let go, yeah, you're letting go and it's working.
Right.
So, to break that loose, sometimes what I do is I rotate. I love the hitchhiker for this
Mhm.
because all I have to do is rotate that hitch a little bit, and
Yep.
it just easily. So many other devices, depending on how fat I am, takes a lot of push, and there's that
Mhm.
initial break it loose, but rotating it takes some of it.
The point is, if you can have the awareness of mind to get away from the unisender so that it can reload.
Delayed, and so TJ, you want to put your hand above the ascender there, maybe like pushing it down a little bit. Just let's make this a little bit more fun. And I don't know if you'd have that much slack going on in your system, would you? While you're working, but you might be doing something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so you'll be working along and kind of trying to figure out what you're going along. So you remember how long it takes to get in 1 second how far you'll fall?
That far.
Okay. Now you didn't
I
push
didn't
the
do
top
that.
down,
I
and
didn't.
notice how well the unisender just engaged
Yep.
and did what it was going to do. But it's kind of a startling moment, isn't it?
It's a very startling moment.
And let's do it while you're here. Let's tie you off again
Okay.
and do it one more time.
Wait, this.
So you're all working and everything. You got stuff going on.
Being an idiot, I
You
got
got-
my.
You got your groundy over there. What's he doing?
Yeah, he's taking pictures.
Can you tell
Oh,
what
hi,
he's
Raj.
doing?
Oh!
All right, that's really catching good.
Yeah.
Um,
The trick is to not hold it, because that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
If you panic and hold it,
just go ahead and do
You're
that all
going.
the way to the ground.
Yeah.
Let the belay do its thing.
Okay.
It's pretty hard. It's pretty hard to have that unisender not engaged.
Yep.
In position.
Right, he had his hand on the knot and started breathing.
All right, we got take two.
Okay.
Hey, Wally, speed the branch.
I think he stopped about 3 feet off.
Hold on.
All right, so compress your rope runner. Get it nice and compressed. So Will is out here and he's doing a rope limb walk, and he's trying to get out there and he's trying to talk to Roger, and his rope runner's compressed and everything, and just basically no friction so that he can walk the rope, right? And tell Roger
Hey, Roger.
what he's doing.
Fixing the limb walk.
You remember how many feet you fall? Take a look at Roger and tell Roger how many feet you fall.
Are those
if it's
rocks
2
right there,
seconds.
Roger?
Huh?
They're
How
nice
far-
soft
how far you
rocks.
fall
I'm
in 2
back here,
seconds.
Will.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Wow. I'm not sure if the whole taking the hand thing is a big deal.
There you go.
Yeah, because it seemed to, like I didn't grab onto it.
Yeah, now if you were squeezing the rope,
So if I came up and squeezed on the rope and tried it,
you want to try it one more time and give the rope a good squeeze. You've got a pretty good grip on the rope, right?
yeah,
Even then it's
even then, Yeah.
grabbing. So
yeah.
that's good. We're gonna put the lanyard on top of your unisender. Randy somehow has caught his lanyard, so it's laying on top of his unisender, and he's not paying a lot of attention to that. He actually unhooked it, and Randy's on his unisender, and it's completely compressed because he's doing some work, and he's been limb walking and everything, and then he didn't pay attention, and he actually accidentally hooked his lanyard on top of the unisender.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, I mean, you know, he was working, and he was looking up this way, and it went like that, and it's, you know, now it's just hanging on top of his unisender, right? So
So what's going to happen when you
He's-
cut the cord? I'm going all the way.
he's doing all that stuff, and he's got one hand out here, and his other hand is over there pointing at Roger, right?
Hey, Roger.
And Roger's there,
I would
and
speculate.
seeing what's going on.
How's the weather up
And-
It's
there?
nice knowing you,
Take
Randy.
another look at Roger. You can't be. you
Okay,
can't be
hey,
looking
Roger.
over here.
Whoa!
I'd engaged.
And
Yeah.
even
Even
with
with that
the
on
weight of this lanyard sitting on top of his
Right.
unisender, and even if I drop it, all right, it takes an
okay.
awful lot
Yeah.
to get that to go down.
Oh,
And
okay.
even if I try to push him down the rope,
Yeah.
it's-
Go a little way, but again.
it's
hard.
gonna
Yeah,
it's
really
gonna
hard to do.
engage because that spring is in a position that it can work and compensate for that top plate being out
Okay,
of
now,
position.
Richard, what if this sucker is out like that? Then I got a
Put
whole
it out.
different problem?
It wouldn't make any difference because
It would.
nope, I'm gonna come down
Okay.
and try
Well,
to
if you had
get it
400
down,
foot
right?
of rope hanging
So
there.
it's completely out of the L bracket, but this is all going to engage, right? Even with the lanyard laying on top, if I push this down, I can't make Randy go to the ground. And it's really jerky. If you try to use this in the squeeze mode, look at how jerky it is.
Right.
And that alone
Yeah.
could make somebody panic.
Right.
But pushing down on that,
Expert
and
witnesses
the
can
concept of ever putting this above for aerial rescue or something and doing this, probably a bad idea because even
can
if
we
I could
pull
get that to
down on
come
the
down,
lanyard?
it's so jerky
It's going to
that
engage, right?
it just,
You do have the auto belays back up for life support, and it will let you down gently. I'm gonna pull on this and let's see what happens
pull on what?
on the lanyard.
Oh,
Yeah,
this
No.
is the
Oh,
lanyard.
I'll put it back on. Let's it disengaging, but at least the auto belay will keep you.
I'll tell you what, let me do this. I've got, this is a quickie on this end, and that would be, let's say he had a quickie somehow up there for whatever reason, and this quickie is in a position where it's going to land on top of his rope, right?
And
Give
then
that a
some more
tug.
unlike me.
And
down
even if I
on
got
it.
this out, that's
Out,
that's
out,
okay.
out.
All right.
Okay. Give it a tug.
Whoa!
Oh, that's a big one.
Okay, that made it a little ways.
Yeah.
But it re-engages.
Yeah.
Well, I quit pulling too.
Well, yeah, but I mean, right, you
Yeah.
could keep pulling them, and that's another point. When it comes to aerial rescue, I am not an advocate of putting anything on top of somebody's hitch or rope
Right.
runner or any of that kind of stuff.
Whatever
It's,
is about, yeah.
it really opens the
Grab
door
device.
to some complications.
Right. Right.
Keep going. And
Is he on the hitchhiker?
yeah,
Yeah.
so he's on his hitchhiker. All right, go ahead and keep letting it out. Let it out. Okay, so his hitchhiker is at the moment completely unloaded, and he's gonna do some limb walking. So he's got his hand on top of the hitch right here as he keeps it compressed because he doesn't want any friction so that he can be successfully out there limb walking, right? And this is out of play. So you got your other hand doing something over there while you're doing your limb walking, and your hitch is completely compressed. And there it goes.
Surprise.
And
Thank goodness.
it would take a lot for you to overcome that, but obviously it happens enough that there's incidents. So I'm going to talk about those three concepts, and I'm going to start with the basic concept of the Blake's hitch. Maybe before that they were tying a taut line. But those three principles that I mentioned are present
in this climbing system. So the non-controllable proportional friction, that would be right up there on the limb. Now, if you were doing a removal, you wouldn't care about a cambium saver and such. But that's your friction, and that's proportional. If I weigh with my harness 200 pounds, I'm hoping that the friction that's created up at that is going to take maybe 70% of my weight, so that the remaining percent goes on our friction hitch. Now, because this is in a doubled moving rope, each side is only looking at half of my weight. That really helps this friction hitch. Notice that there's not a lot of real estate on that hitch. So that's the proportional non-controllable friction. The controllable friction that we have is in this hitch. So when I put my harness on here someplace as an anchor, this becomes my controllable friction. I push down on the top and I go down. When I'm ascending, you slide your knot up and then it engages. Where is the spring or the automated action in order to engage our controllable friction? That's in the tension of this rope. If you properly tie your friction hitch, there's going to be tension on there, so that if you're going up the rope and then you let go, that tension is going to engage that friction hitch and it will stop you from descending to the ground. If it's not properly tied, or it's poorly tied, or it loosens up, then you run the risk of having it just freely go down the rope. You run the risk on any of I hear something funny. I was recording this and I have it on vocal stuff, so if I say GoPro, stop recording. So if you put something above this hitch and you're coming down, it STOPs. If it's properly tied and if it's properly maintained. You don't want to have your hands come down on the top of this hitch. You don't want a branch to come down on the top. You don't want a possum come down on this hitch. This is your life support, and it's very important that you protect that. A lot of times people will ask, well, why can't we use this in a single rope configuration? Well, again, look at the size of the real estate. The brake pads aren't that big. If you're a big truck and you come down a hill with small brake pads, they're going to be really grabby, and eventually they're going to glaze over and they won't do anything. So the reason is that just doesn't work well, and it's also twice as much weight on that hitch. So those are the basics, and now we're going to go through some other systems and find, and you can do this with any of your climbing systems, find those basic concepts. And if it's a good climbing system for going up and down and laterally, it's going to have these concepts. GoPro, stop recording. So here's a rope clamp. Great device for going up the rope. And so we wonder, why can't we just use this for a multi-sender? It has spring action right there, so that if it's ever left on its own, that spring will engage and prevent it from coming down the rope. The proportional non-controllable friction, it really only goes from either almost 0% friction to 100% friction. It doesn't go in between that. In other words, it's going to hold all of my weight, or it's not going to hold any of my weight. So it's not going to work as that proportional friction. Also, it doesn't have the controllable friction. If we were to attach a hitch on here or something like that and try to use that for controllable friction, then we're back to, if we squeeze this and release all that friction, we're back to having the controllable trying to do what the non-controllable friction is supposed to do. In other words, it's like trying to go down a rope on a single leg stitch. It doesn't work very well. You could potentially try to use something like this in a single rope configuration. So if you were to squeeze this to try to release it, in other words, try to get a descent out of a device like this, because this device works great for a lanyard, again, you've eliminated most of the weight you're standing on something, so your lanyard's not taking a lot of weight. And normally your lanyard is in a doubled configuration, so you can use this for a lanyard. But if you were to try to squeeze this and make it work to come down, what you find is that that single point of friction taking all of your weight just doesn't function very well. It'll either glaze the rope or it'll bind on the rope. The only other way that it would work is if you just don't weigh very much. I mean, again, the proportional friction for me, if it leaves 30 pounds on something, then I can probably make it work because I have that proportional non-controllable friction. So if you were climbing, you weighed 30 pounds, yeah, you could probably make this work. GoPro, stop recording. So looking at a figure eight, a lot of people, it's a great descent device, right? It just doesn't work very good for going up the rope because, again, where is the non-controllable proportional friction? It's in your wraps around your figure eight. The more I weigh, the more friction gets put on here. Where is the controllable friction? It's in my hand. If you don't have your hand on here, you won't have much friction. Your proportional friction won't be applied to that figure eight, and of course the results won't be good. Also, what's missing in this device, again, it's a great descent device, but what is missing is that spring. There's nothing here to automatically engage that. If I let go of that tail, then down the rope you go. It's only when you have the tail of the rope that you're able to maintain the proportional non-controllable friction, and by holding the tail, the controllable friction. So, great device for coming down, not good for going up. The rope clamp, great for going up, not good for coming down. So you could use one, get up, come back down on the other, but then you're switching over and it's inconvenient. So the unisender is a really great tool as a multi-sender. It has all of those components. There's a spring right here, a plunger type of a spring. That spring is what engages automatically the action for the friction. So there's that spring. There's a couple different ways of getting the controllable and the non-controllable friction, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But notice that the spring holds all of those plates, even if it's out like that. That's not the direction the rope would be going, but even if it's out like that, that spring lifts all of those plates to ensure that there's engagement when it's properly used. Always has that spring to engage in any configuration. And again, what's great about this is it combines a rope clamp, it combines the figure eight device, it works both in a doubled moving rope, and it works in a single rope configuration. GoPro, stop recording. So for a long time I used a unisender in a modified frog walker, and I won't get into what that entailed, but it was very functional. It's a very compact device, but when I would go up a rope, I would take steps, and every step it would engage every time. Every time. I never had it not engaging, or not engage the rope. All the time, every step it would engage. GoPro, stop recording. So when you're climbing in a single rope configuration, we use a tending device, something to lift the ascender. Now notice when I'm lifting the unisender, the plates have gone off to an angle. It's not like when I was holding it and walking up the rope, but the plates have gone off to an angle. So now it goes up and it goes down the rope. Take a look at where that spring is for the plunger, it's totally out of the game. It's not doing anything because of the angle of that bracket. As soon as I put weight on it, then the plunger and the spring jumps into action. If you got it just like this, it's not in play. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But I hope that makes sense. Also, the angle of those clutches opens that, so there's just, I mean, when you lift this up, there's practically zero drag going up there. And that's what you want when you're ascending a rope. But you want something that's going to stop you from going down the rope. GoPro, stop recording. So when would it be in this kind of configuration when you're going up the rope? If I have a foot ascender and a knee ascender, and I'm walking up the rope, and I'm tending this from here, and I have, say, a rope bridge that goes up and over this anchor, and it's not a heavy rope bridge, there's not much weight, that unisender is going to walk up the rope and it's going to be in a position just like this. Now, if I were to take off my foot ascender, my knee ascender, if something were to disappear down there, then the first thing that's going to happen is my rope bridge is going to engage that spring and the unisender is going to engage. So when somebody sees that, they get concerned and they think, oh, the unisender's not engaging. But that's not how it works. When you sit down on it, when you put your weight into it, the spring goes into action and all of those things engage. So just like on a Blake's hitch, just like in every system that we use, the top of this has to be very protected. The other way to make this go down is by pushing down on the top. So if a possum comes down, the top of the tree comes down, your chainsaw comes down, if you hit the top of this, what you're going to do is you're going to overpower that spring action, and you're going to cause all of these to compress, and it's going to do what it's supposed to do. It releases the rope, and you're going to come down maybe faster than you'd like. So pushing down disengages that friction. In other words, you won't have 100% friction. You'll start coming down the rope. This is one of the major reasons we don't use a squeeze mode in a singled rope configuration. Because now you've gone and you're trying to use this just like you might use that rope clamp. And it becomes very unpredictable. So here's one scenario that can happen. And again, you should never, and when we rope walk, I have my hands above my ascender. And I've trained myself, and it came into play one day and saved me from getting to the ground. But I've trained myself to, if for whatever reason I start sliding down the rope, I get my hands off of the top. If you feel like your hands are getting you hot, you're going down the rope and you can't figure out why, and it takes a moment to figure that out, and a moment hanging on the rope can be 10 or 15 feet. You let go of this and everything's going to start to work the way it's supposed to. The other thing, and I think we all know that, but the other thing is if you're trying to use it, say for example, in this squeeze mode, and you've got your hand up here someplace, what would happen is you've taken the weight off of this L bracket. So when you take the weight off of that L bracket, because you've got your hands up here and it's in a position like this, then it's free to go down the rope and you're free to follow it down the rope. As long as you have your hands up here, they don't even have to be touching the top of the unisender. All they have to do is you have to have enough lift and enough drag and friction up here that it keeps this L bracket in an upward position, because you don't have enough weight. If you have a lightweight bridge, you may not have enough weight on this to engage that spring. So again, you've got your hands above the device. They don't even have to come down on top of the device. They just have to be above the device. If I'm doing that and this is kept in this position, then the unisender and I will both be going down the rope until at some point I either let go. Well, let's just say that at some point I let go and it re-engages and stops. GoPro, stop recording. So when we're going up the rope and we're rope walking, we have everything engaged and we're going up. We stop and now we want to come back down the rope. When you do the wrap up over the top, it squeezes all these plates together, it wraps up, and now we have gone to a non-controllable friction. That'll be all of the wraps that come around here. This is just like going around a figure eight. It gives all of that friction. And now you've got your controllable friction being your brake hand on the unisender, just like on a figure eight. So it's like having a rope clamp and like having a figure eight together. Okay, so again, what's great about the unisender is it works equally well in a single rope configuration, or if you've just swapped it over and put it in a doubled rope, moving rope configuration. Now I have my proportional non-controllable friction up here taking a large part of that friction, and then the remaining part of the friction is back in these clutches. And because it's such a small amount, depending on the weight of the climber, you may find that you're able to function, use the unisender just by pushing down on the top of the plates or compressing, squeezing the plates together. Again, my recommendation, even in a doubled moving rope, is just to do the wraps and have your brake hand in control. And that gets in another subject, but that'll actually work that way, and you can squeeze those plates. Keep in mind though, as soon as you do this and those plates aren't squeezed together, you're putting an awful lot of wear on those clutches inside those plates, and that's more expensive to replace. If you put it in the squeeze mode, then those clutches have released. Again, you can see the angle that they're at. So those clutches have mostly released, and your wear now becomes on the drum and on the L bracket, if you have it. Otherwise it's on the top plate, or it's on that L bracket and the bottom. So it will work that way. Again, the proportional amount of friction is up at the top. The controllable friction is now in this hand. This is not the controllable friction now. This is the controllable friction being in your hand. Proportional friction in this configuration would be up here. It's also in that wrap right there, just like on the figure eight. Controllable is right here. GoPro, stop recording. GoPro, stop recording. Didn't even hear me. GoPro, stop recording.